Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Kansas City-style burnt ends Philly cheesesteak. That's right, to honor the two teams in the Super Bowl. We're taking two of the most iconic foods from both cities, and we're putting them together to create a very delicious, very Super Bowl party-friendly hybrid. And no, you do not need an expensive beef brisket to do this. And yes, that is Cheese Whiz. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by prepping our beef. And because we're doing a much faster cheater method that doesn't use beef brisket, what we need is about 3.5 pounds of beef chuck. And the first thing we'll do is generously coat both sides with our favorite barbecue dry rub. Right, whatever you normally use on your brisket or ribs will totally work here. And I'm sure you already have some laying around or already have a favorite brand you like to use. But if you don't, I'll let you know what I used in the written recipe. And as you can see, this beef chuck does have a nice amount of fat and some decent marbling. So while it's not quite as fatty as a brisket, especially the point end of a brisket, which is what burnt ends are made from, it's going to do a great job for what we're using it for here. But anyway, like I said, we'll go ahead and season both sides very generously. And then we'll pick up our meat and we'll season the sides with the excess that fell on the paper. And that's it. We can now transfer that onto a foil-lined pan, actually a double foil-lined pan. And after wrapping it in one piece, we'll flip that over and wrap it again, ending up with a seam on top, which I was going to say is so that juices don't escape, but they usually do that anyway, and they did here. But that's fine, it's not going to matter, as you'll see. And then once that's been accomplished, we can proceed to the first of 3 different roastings, and for this one we'll transfer that into the center of a 325-degree oven for 2.5 hours, at which point our pan is probably going to look something like this. And yes, as I mentioned, some of that juice did leak out, but as long as we don't throw it away, we're going to be fine. And then what we'll do at this point is let it sit and cool and rest for 1 hour, after which it should be perfectly safe to open up. And you are definitely going to see more accumulated juices inside. And just like the ones on the pan, we're not going to discard those. And then once that's been unwrapped, we'll go ahead and transfer that to a cutting board, where we will attempt to cut this into nice square 1-inch cubes, give or take. But before we do that, I like to take a knife and cut the meat wherever there was a natural separation, which is going to be very obvious. And not only will this allow us to cube up our meat a little more uniformly, but those are the spots that contain the most fat and connective tissue. In this way, we're going to expose those, which is exactly the kind of stuff we want on the outside of the piece as we move on through this process of roasting and charring. So we will divide and conquer. And by conquer, like I said, we'll cut this into 1-inch cubes. And that's it. Once we've completed the cubification, we will transfer that into a mixing bowl, and we will pour over those precious accumulated juices from inside the foil and from the pan. And then for good luck, I decided to sprinkle in about 1 more teaspoon of our dry rub. I don't know, it just felt right. And then we will finish this up with a 1/2 cup of our favorite Kansas City-style barbecue sauce. And we'll take a big spoon and give that a mix. And the sauce you use could be a bottle you bought at the store that had Kansas City on the label. Or you could find our all-American barbecue sauce recipe, which is based on the Kansas City style. Or, and this is very important, use any barbecue sauce you like. And that's it. Once that's mixed and we've settled everything down, we're going to wrap this and pop it in the fridge overnight to sort of marinade/brine. I know you thought you could only do that with raw meat, but it sort of works the same with cooked meat as well. So I probably should have mentioned, if you want this today, you have to start it yesterday. And no, I never get tired of that joke. And that's it. The next day we'll pull it out and unwrap it. And we will transfer it into some kind of shallow baking dish. And once that's in, we'll use our spatula to distribute that evenly. And while I do think this comes out much better with the overnight soak in the fridge, if you can't do it, it's fine. You can theoretically just skip to this step. But either way, once that's set, we will give the top a generous brushing with some more barbecue sauce. And once we've applied as much as we want, we will move to the second roasting, where we intentionally burn our beef. And we'll do that by placing this in the center of a 450-degree oven for about 1 hour, or until we have something that looks like this. Oh yeah, that looks a little burnt. But that is exactly what we want. So we've achieved the appearance of burnt ends. Now we have to work on getting something remotely close to the texture. So we will give this 1 more brushing of our barbecue sauce. And then for the final roasting, we're going to go low and slow So we will lower our oven to 250. And once that's been sauced, we'll transfer it in, and we will roast it for about an hour and a half, or until our pieces of beef are even more charred and as tender as we want. And just so everyone's clear, there's no way we're going to achieve that soft, succulent, melt-in-your-mouth texture of real burnt ends. All right, this was more of an experiment to get something that tasted like those and looked like those, and that would eventually make a delicious sandwich. All right, to give you a frame of reference, the final texture of this on the sandwich is going to be closer to biting into an actual piece of steak versus something that just falls apart like a chunk of beef stew. Oh, and you see all that delicious fat at the bottom? What I insist you do is spread some of that on the roll you're going to make your cheesesteak with, which is exactly what I did here. And then you don't have to toast the roll, but the oven's already hot, so I turned it up to 350 and toasted it for about 7 minutes, which whether you soaked it with beef fat or not, I think makes everything better. And that's it. We'll go ahead and place on as many of those burnt ends as we want. And by the way, if you've never heard of burnt ends, in Kansas City and other places where they barbecue briskets, they will cut off and cube up what are literally the burnt ends, and then they toss those with barbecue sauce and put them back in the smoker. And for lack of a better description, what these pieces are basically meat candy. And that's it. After the meat's down, we can go ahead and apply our cheese, which could be sliced provolone, but I was feeling naughty, so I decided to go with Cheese Whiz. Off-brand Cheese Whiz, to be exact. And yes, if you look on the label, the only thing you won't see is real actual cheese. Or so I assume. I was actually too afraid to look at the label. But anyway, I took my cheese and whizzed it all over the top, creating, as you can see, a very precise, uniform design. And then once this meat's cheesed, we can top this any way we top our regular cheesesteaks, which for me is with some sautéed onions and pickled peppers. But anyway, how you finish this off is up to you. I mean, you are, after all, the Billy Joel of what goes on this roll. Oh, and speaking of New York state of mind, Billy and I both agree the Giants will be in the Super Bowl next year. And then don't laugh. Or do. But once I finished that, I decided to fine-tune my Cheese Whiz design for really no apparent reason. But anyway, once I'd re-whizzed, I finished this off with some finely and freshly sliced green onions. And my Kansas City-style burnt ends Philly cheesesteak was ready to enjoy. So I went ahead and cut that in half. And I could not wait to bite into this Kansas City-Philadelphia hybrid, with the emphasis on high. And that, my friends, really was tremendous. Okay, considering the fact we didn't use brisket, or a smoker, or the proper technique, we ended up with something with a very similar flavor profile to burnt ends. Or at least that's what it seemed like after a couple double IPAs. Although, as I already admitted, not quite the same tender texture. Right, some of the fattier pieces will be very similar, but because we went for surface caramelization, some of your leaner pieces might start getting a little bit dry. But with all these different chunks mixed together on the sandwich, especially once lubricated with Cheese Whiz and covered with sautéed onions and peppers, okay, when all that's eaten together, I thought the texture was actually very, very enjoyable. And I've deemed this very gimmicky experiment a complete success. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and finish this off. And what I want you to do is make sure you're not dreaming and that this is real. And if it is, head to the store and get yourself some beef chuck and a can of Cheese Whiz, preferably off-brand, because I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.